Hello, in this tasting I'd like to take a look at a wine from Saint Emilion. The wine I'm looking at is Saint Emilion Grand Cru, the 2015 vintage of Chateau Martinet. Now Martinet is, as I say, Saint Emilion Grand Cru. The estate has a beautiful 18th century chateau which is depicted on the label. They have 17 hectares of vineyard on the estate and also 6 hectares of parkland. The entire size of the estate is something like 25 hectares. Evidently it had been a hunting lodge before it became a wine estate. Today it's the family home for the Pradel de Lavaux family, a very old family with a long involvement of winemaking on Bordeaux's right bank. And the estate is also the centre for the family's winemaking operations. The estate sits in the outskirts of Libourne. It's very easy to miss, you don't see it. There's a sort of screen of trees from the park that prevent you from seeing the house from the road. As I say, it's pretty much in Libourne's suburbs, but the other estate that it's located nearby is Chateau Quinault L'Enclos. Now it came into the hands of the Pradel de Lavaux family through the Horeau family, and the Horeaus are one of the sets of the Pradel de Lavaux family's ancestors who helped build up the business and the estates that they now manage. The Horeau name is probably best known for its involvement with a very old Bordeaux negociant house, Horeau-Beylot, which started in 1740 as Beylot et Fils, and through intermarriage with the Horeau family, the business changed its name in the 19th century to Horeau-Beylot, the business under which it now operates. Louis Horeau was quite an important figure in the shaping of the current business, and when he took over the various estates and the trading house in 1938, he used a process of consolidation to combine the estates and the negociant house to form a business that's described as a Propriétaire-Négociant. So in other words, both a vineyard owner and a third-party merchant. That business was passed down to Louis Horeau's 2 sons-in-laws, Jacques Pradel de Lavaux and Rene de Coninck. And the family have various estates in Saint Emilion, in Pomerol, in Lalande de Pomerol, in Fronsac, and also estates that produce generic Bordeaux. Today the estates are run by a brother and sister, Axel and Ines Pradel de Lavaux, and they are the 10th generation of their family to be involved in winemaking on Bordeaux's right bank. Now the vineyard for Chateau Martinet sits on sand and gravel soils that are a continuation of the famous Grave subregion of Saint Emilion, and that's where you find estates such as Figeac, Cheval Blanc, and then also across the boundary into Pomerol. Some of these similar soil types are seen in the vineyards of Chateau Lafleur. Average vine age here is a creditable 40 years, so these should be fully mature vines, providing some quite concentrated fruit. Now 2015 was regarded as a superb vintage for most of Bordeaux. Saint Emilion is no exception to that. A benign winter was followed by a balmy spring. The easy growing conditions of quite a hot spring ensured a very successful bud burst and flowering, which put the rest of the growing season in very good stead. The summer was hot and dry, and that did cause problems for some of the younger vines whose root systems were less well established. And that perhaps shows how important vine age can be to an estate such as Chateau Martinet, where the combination of sand and gravel in the soils means that the soils don't retain water particularly well. However, the heat and sunshine ensured that good phenolic ripeness was achieved. So not just flavour ripeness, but also nice ripe tannins. Fortunately, however, before conditions became really challenging for the vines, in August there was some relieving rain that was sufficient to reinvigorate the vines. And then fine weather settled in right the way through harvest. So really the harvest seems to have been quite a straightforward, ideal vintage for the vine growers. The grapes here were harvested entirely by hand and then sorted manually to remove any unripe, unhealthy or damaged fruit. After destemming and crushing, the fruit was transferred to small concrete tanks for fermentation, which went ahead in these small, temperature-controlled concrete vats, with the idea of ensuring that fermentation went on vineyard block by vineyard block to ensure that the individual characteristic of each plot is preserved to the final wine. Vatting was allowed to go on for between 2 and 3 weeks. The wine underwent malolactic fermentation and moved into French oak barrels to mature for somewhere between 15 and 18 months. Presumably these will have been 225 litre barriques, and the split I'm given is that a third of the barrels were new, a third of them had been used for one vintage previously, and the remaining third had contained 2 or more previous vintages. Yields were 35 hectolitres per hectare, and while I found it really difficult to find individual blends for the different vintages of Chateau Martinet, there is actually a reference I found that says that the blend in 2015 was exactly along the lines of the plantings in the vineyard, i.e. 65% Merlot and 35% of Cabernet Franc. So let's take a look at the wine, shall we? Looking at it, it's got a lovely mature colour. It's a sort of a ruby red, a medium intensity. I can see through it fairly clearly. There is no sort of bluish purple hint there at all. If anything, there's perhaps a sort of a slight brickiness. The rim has a slight orangey colour there. Swirling it, the wine is labelled as having 14% alcohol and is forming some quite obvious tears on the side of the glass fairly easily there. Now, as I've been talking, I've been getting some wafts of slightly savoury notes coming from the glass, so I'll be really interested to examine the aromas more closely. Let's have a look, shall we? There are a number of things going on here. There's quite a rich, ripe red fruit, but has a slightly sort of sultana or currant edge to it, that slight sultana, currant, raisin sort of dried fruit edge to it, suggesting sort of real ripeness in there. You've got some developed tertiary notes. There are touches of mushroom and truffle, that sort of slightly savoury note with hints of umami. And then you come back to this lovely, rich, deep, plum to prune sort of red fruit. Perhaps even a hint of spicy oak back there. So that's for taste. On the palate, there's a richness, a roundness, and a warmth. Having said that, there is a very fine and still quite drying tannic structure there. It's giving quite a mouth-watering edge. You get some of those sort of savoury notes, again, overlaying that sort of very ripe plum through to slightly dried prune note in the fruit, and developing just to show hints of mushroom and truffle there. There is a nice balance between the high ripeness fruit here and those more developed, slightly gamey, savoury notes. There's still a fair structure to the wine, and the warmth of the alcohol is nicely married to the richness of the fruit. The wine is relatively full-bodied, and the structure is actually giving length to the finish, giving some maybe slightly spicy notes just to complement the savoury, tertiary developed notes that were apparent initially and have continued on into the finish. Now, the drinking window that I've seen suggested for this is out to 2025, so obviously I'm past that stage now. Personally, I think the level of development the wine has is still nicely balanced with some of its primary fruit expression. So yes, I think this is a wine that's reached the stage where you can say it's fully developed. It will probably hold in that condition for 2 or 3 years. Having said that, the acidity is quite soft and the structure is still quite firm. So I think there is perhaps a possibility that maybe after that couple of years you could end up with a wine that may seem a little lean and harsh. But just at the moment, there's a lovely combination of high ripeness fruit and bottle-age developed complexity. I took a look at the aggregated critics score that's marked on winesearcher for this wine, and that comes in at 89 out of 100. I'm pretty happy with that as a score. I think 89, maybe 90 is very reasonable. I think this is a wine that's at a nice point of its drinking, and as I say, probably needs to be consumed in the next couple of years. I'll leave a link to the winesearcher webpage for this vintage of this wine so you can see at what price it's being offered and where it's available to buy. But I would certainly suggest it's likely to be at a good price. If it is, it may well be worth trying, because I think this is a wine that's in quite a nice place at the moment. It's very enjoyable. So thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, it would be amazing if you could press the like button for me. I'd really appreciate that. And if you're watching these videos and you enjoy them, do please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. The more followers I have would really help me to develop the channel further. If you have any friends you think might like to watch, please feel free to pass it on to them. I'd really appreciate your support in that way. If you have any comments, questions or suggestions, do please feel free to pop those in the comments box below. I'd love to know what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else that relates to that. So thank you once again for taking the time to come and join me, and I do hope that maybe you'll manage to make some time and come and join me for another tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.